They thought he was just the janitor, until he solved a calculus problem no one else could, and everything changed. It was fourth period on a cloudy Thursday at Eisenberg High School in Elkhart, Indiana. The kind of day where students glance at the clock more than the board and teachers speak with one eye on the bell schedule. Mr. Carlson, the school's calculus teacher, stood at the front of the classroom with his sleeves rolled up and his usual smirk in place. Carlson had a reputation. Sharp-tongued, impatient, and always ready with a sarcastic jab. He wasn't hated, but he wasn't exactly admired either. Students learned to tolerate him, the same way you tolerate a long wait at the DMV with clenched jaws and eyes half-rolled. The classroom was dry, the kind of sterile quiet that settles in math classes where enthusiasm had long since evaporated. Whiteboards filled with half-erased equations loomed behind Mr. Carlson as he scrawled another derivative across the surface, pausing only to sip lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. Outside the classroom door, a faint squeak echoed down the hallway. The mop. Malcolm Pierce, the school janitor, was doing his rounds. Carlson heard the squeak and, without missing a beat, turned to the class with a smirk. "Well, look who's here," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Pierce, think you can solve this one?" He tapped the equation on the board with the back of his marker like a game show host issuing a challenge. Some students laughed. Not all of them. It wasn't the kind of joke that made you feel free to laugh, more the kind that made you look around, unsure if it was even funny. The kind that feels wrong, but somehow gets a pass because it came from the teacher. In the hallway, Malcolm stood motionless. He was 52 years old, with a forest green janitor's uniform faded from years of wear. His name, M. Pierce, was stitched neatly above his heart. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just looked into the room. Then, slowly, he stepped inside. He leaned his mop against the wall without saying a word. A few students sat up straighter. Some whispered. Most were expecting him to crack a joke back or maybe just shake his head and walk away. But he didn't. Instead, Malcolm walked calmly to the front of the classroom. "You mind?" he asked, nodding at the board. Carlson raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. "Be my guest," he said. Several phones slid out of backpacks. Someone whispered, "Is he serious?" Malcolm picked up the marker, studied the equation, and paused. Not because he was nervous, but because he was thinking. Really thinking. Like someone reading a familiar map he hadn't seen in years, but still knew every turn. Then he began to write. No flair. No flash, just slow, deliberate strokes, line after line. The room fell into an eerie silence. You could hear a pin drop, or in this case, the soft creak of a chair as someone leaned in. Carlson crossed his arms, his expression neutral but jaw tight. He watched closely. Malcolm spoke as he worked. His voice was low and steady. "This here is a chain rule problem. Trick is identifying the inner function first. Once you isolate that, everything else simplifies." It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Clear. Calm. Like a teacher who had done this before many times. When he finished, he capped the marker and stepped back. The board was filled with clean, organized steps, every part labeled, every transformation explained. He turned to the class, then to Mr. Carlson. "That's one way to do it," he said simply. Nobody moved. For a moment, it was like the whole room had stopped breathing. A junior in the back finally whispered, "He got it right." Carlson opened his mouth, but no words came. His lips parted, then pressed into a thin line. Malcolm nodded politely. He turned and walked back toward the door, picked up his mop, and without another word, returned to the hallway. No applause, no boasting. Just quiet confidence. Like he hadn't just flipped the entire classroom dynamic upside down. As he disappeared down the hall, someone finally said it out loud. Wait, he just did that in his head? It was Julian Brooks, a senior known for his serious demeanor and GPA obsession. He wasn't joking. His eyes were wide. He looked at the board again, as if the numbers might change. Carlson finally spoke, though his voice lacked its usual sharp edge. Well, he got the right answer. But there was something different in his tone. Not sarcasm, not dismissal, something closer to confusion. Or maybe respect. After the bell rang and students spilled into the hallway, the buzz started almost immediately. Whispers turned into full-blown conversations. Phones were out. The video had already hit TikTok, then Instagram. It wasn't high quality, just a shaky clip of Malcolm Pierce calmly working through a calculus problem, but it had something raw, something real. The caption read, "Our janitor just smoked the calculus teacher." By lunchtime, it was all anyone talked about. In the teacher's lounge, the conversation wasn't any quieter. "You're telling me he solved a full derivative chain problem in his head?" Ms. Holloway, the physics teacher, asked mid-bite into her sandwich. "He did," muttered Mr. Crane from English. Didn't use notes, didn't pause, like he's been doing it his whole life. Mr. Carlson sat in the corner pretending to grade papers, his face unreadable. He hadn't said a word since it happened, but Principal Gaines did. "He's been here 6 years. No one ever mentioned an academic background." Nobody had ever asked. Back in his janitor's closet, Malcolm sat alone on a wooden stool. The mop leaned in the corner. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the shelf beside a rusted thermos. He stared at his handshans worn from years of labor, yet steady as ever. Later that afternoon, Principal Gaines called him into the front office. Malcolm showed up in his uniform, the knees damp from wiping up a cafeteria spill. He took off his cap as he entered out of respect. Gaines gestured for him to sit. "Mr. Pierce, can I ask you something?" Malcolm gave a small nod. "Do you have a background in education or engineering?" Malcolm hesitated. His eyes dropped to the floor. "I went to Purdue," he said softly. "Mechanical engineering, full scholarship." Gaines leaned back, eyebrows rising. "You serious?" Malcolm gave a quiet nod. Had plans. Life got complicated. And for the first time in years, he told the story. He grew up in Gary, Indiana. Smart kid, always fascinated by how things worked, motors, pulleys, anything he could take apart and put back together. His mother, Estelle, raised him and his 2 sisters on her own. She worked overtime at a textile plant and still found time to read to them every night. She believed in education like it was the only ticket out. Books first. Always, she'd say. The world might shut the door, but if you bring your own key, they can't keep you out. Malcolm earned that key. He graduated valedictorian, won the state science fair, and got that full ride to Purdue. Freshman year, he was already tutoring classmates. His professors knew his name before he ever raised his hand. But during his sophomore year, he got a call that changed everything. His mother had collapsed at work. Late-stage cancer, they said. By the time Malcolm made it to the hospital, she was barely conscious. "I can take care of it," she whispered. "Don't come home." He didn't listen. He took a semester off, then another. He worked warehouse shifts, night jobs, anything to cover the bills. School started to slip into the background. And by the time she passed, his plans were in pieces. No home to return to, no money left. No one from Purdue calling to ask why he hadn't come back. "I kept thinking I'd return," Malcolm told Gaines. "Just needed a little time." "But life doesn't wait for you." Principal Gaines sat quietly, absorbing every word. It wasn't a dramatic story, just a real one. Back at home, Malcolm kept a box under his bed. Inside was an old Purdue sweatshirt, yellowed transcripts, a worn calculator, and a photo of him and his mom on orientation day. He hadn't opened it in years. He didn't need to. The knowledge never left him. He just never had a reason to use it again. Until Mr. Carlson pointed at him like a punchline. And for the first time in a very long time, Malcolm realized he still had something to offer. Maybe not to a university, but maybe to the kids who saw more than a mop in his hands. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to open the box again. That evening, after the school emptied and the sun dipped low behind the rows of modest houses, Malcolm Pierce sat on the back steps of his apartment complex. The air was still. He cradled a metal thermos of tea in his hands, letting the warmth soak into his fingers. It had been years since he'd thought this much about calculus. Not since that last tutoring gig before life pulled him away from school. Now, it was all rushing back. The way the numbers folded into each other, the rhythm of a problem unraveling when you looked at it just right. It was like hearing a song you hadn't realized you missed. He didn't go online that night. He didn't see the video that was circulating faster than anyone expected. He didn't know about the likes, the comments, the reposts. But the next morning, everything felt different. Not loud, not obvious. Just different. In the hallway, students looked at him differently. They didn't avoid eye contact anymore. They nodded. Some even smiled. "Mr. Pierce," a girl called from the library. "You're kind of famous now." He chuckled. "Don't believe everything you read." But as he turned the corner, there was Julian Brooks and two other students. One had a calculus book open to a page with a problem highlighted in pink. "Would you mind going through this with us?" Julian asked. Malcolm blinked. "You've got a free period?" "We made time," Julian replied. And just like that, in the middle of a hallway lined with lockers and old science fair posters, Malcolm sat on the floor with three teenagers and began to teach. He didn't stand. He didn't take over, he just talked to them, one line at a time. Step by step, not talking at them, talking with them. It wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, but it meant something. Someone filmed it again. Malcolm didn't know. He wouldn't have liked that. Back in the office, Principal Gaines was on the phone with someone from the district. "Yes, that's right," he said. "Malcolm Pierce." "Been with us 6 years? No, he's not faculty. He's a custodian." A pause. "Well, I wouldn't call it unorthodox," he continued. "I'd call it overlooked." Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, Mr. Carlson stared at a forwarded email with no subject line. Just a link, and the words, "Thought you'd want to see this." He closed the laptop without clicking. That afternoon, Malcolm was called back to the front office. Principal Gaines gestured toward a chair. "I've got a request from the school board," he said. "They want to know if you'd be interested in running an after-school tutoring program. Small group. Voluntary. Just a trial run. Malcolm stayed standing. You'd be paid, of course, Gaines added. It's not about replacing your current role. Just adding to it, sharing what you clearly still have. Malcolm looked down at his hands, calloused. Clean, worn. I haven't taught in a long time, he said. You haven't stopped knowing, Gaines replied. There was no pressure in his voice, just invitation. I'll think about it, Malcolm said. That night, he pulled out the cardboard box from under his bed, the one with the Purdue sweatshirt, the transcripts, the orientation photo with his mom. He hadn't touched it in years. He laid everything out on the kitchen table. The paper had yellowed, the edges curled. But the words, the numbers, the memories were still there. That was the thing about knowledge. It didn't fade. It waited. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting back. By the end of the week, the hallway whisper had grown into something more. Students started calling it Pierce period, that sliver of time after class when a few stuck around to ask questions, share notes, or just sit near the man who made calculus feel less like punishment and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Malcolm didn't ask for it. He never posted a schedule or made an announcement. But every day, at around 3:10 p.m., a handful of students would drift into the library's back corner where he sat with a binder and a few printouts he made using his own money at the staff copier. He didn't teach like a professor. He didn't talk down. He didn't hide behind big words or complex jargon. He sat next to them, side by side, and asked questions before giving answers. Sometimes he drew analogies to gears and levers. Other times, he let the students struggle a little before stepping in. They respected him, not because he demanded it, but because he gave it first. That following Tuesday, something happened that Malcolm didn't expect. Ms. Holloway, from the physics department, came by. She didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway of the library, arms folded, watching. Then, slowly, she walked over, sat down beside the students, and listened as Malcolm broke down a multivariable problem using nothing but a mechanical pencil and an old napkin diagram. "You've got a gift," she said afterward, quiet but firm. "And I don't just mean with numbers." Malcolm gave her a half smile. "I just try to meet them where they are." Later that week, Coach Dunlap stopped him near the vending machines. "You think you could help with a summer prep group?" he asked. "Freshmen coming in next year could use a leg up." "You explain things in a way they actually hear." Malcolm hesitated. "Let's get through this semester first." The attention was new, a little uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being noticed, but it didn't stop him from showing up. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Malcolm set up in the library. No projector, no roster, no lesson plan. Just a chalkboard, his notes, and a worn binder filled with hand-drawn grids and scribbled reminders. And the kids came, not because they had to, because they wanted to. Julian, who once avoided math like the flu, now stayed after to lead his own small group. Grace, a sophomore who used to whisper, now walked in with a folder and a list of questions. Eli, quiet and often overlooked, had begun helping others understand what he had only just learned himself, and Malcolm watched it all unfold, not from the front of the room, but from beside them. What started as a fluke had become something sacred. And slowly, without ceremony, the man with the mop became something more. He wasn't a janitor with a secret anymore. He was a mentor with a purpose. And it all began in a corner of the library where no one asked for credentials, only clarity. where students didn't care what you were called, only whether you could help them find the answer. And Malcolm Pierce did. Every single time. It was only a matter of time before the students gave it a name. They started calling them Pierce Sessions. Not officially, not in any school newsletter, but in texts, group chats, and whispers across campus. You going to the next Pierce session? Malcolm helped me with logarithms. It actually made sense. It wasn't just tutoring anymore. It was something more personal. More rooted. Some students came in with math problems, others came with doubts. But they all left feeling seen. Malcolm never called it a class. He never asked for sign-ups. There were no desks, no grades, no curriculum, only conversations. And slowly, those conversations began to ripple. By the second month, more than a dozen students rotated in and out each week. They came with different struggles, but the same need, to be guided without being judged. Teachers began to take note. One afternoon, Ms. Holloway asked if she could borrow one of Malcolm's analogies to explain force vectors. Coach Dunlap dropped off a stack of extra notebooks for students who couldn't afford supplies. Even the front office receptionist, Ms. Clare, baked cookies one Friday and left them in a tin marked, "For Mr. Pierce's crew." Still, not everyone was thrilled. Mr. Carlson had gone silent, too silent. He didn't acknowledge what was happening, not in the lounge, not in his classroom. Not even when a student referenced something they learned in a Pierce session during one of his lessons. Instead, he tightened, spoke in clipped phrases, avoided eye contact with Malcolm in the halls. When a parent mentioned the tutoring during a conference night, he responded with a tight smile. "It's good the kids are interested in math," he said. "Let's just make sure we're not confusing instruction with inspiration." On the surface, it sounded civil, but everyone in the room heard what he really meant. Principal Gaines didn't let it sit. He called Carlson into his office the next morning. "I know it stung," Gaines said plainly, "but Malcolm didn't embarrass you." He inspired them. Carlson didn't respond, just stared at a spot on the wall. "He's not certified," he muttered eventually. "No," Gaines said, "but he's educated, more than we realized. And more importantly, he's reaching kids in a way most of us haven't." Carlson opened his mouth, then shut it. There was nothing left to argue. Meanwhile, Malcolm continued showing up with the same quiet rhythm as always. He didn't gloat, didn't change his uniform or start asking for special treatment, but he did carry something new, a small binder filled with student questions, hand-drawn diagrams, and notes he'd jotted on paper scraps. During lunch breaks, he'd sit at the corner of the cafeteria, pencil in hand, working out practice problems. Not because he had to, because he knew someone might need it. One afternoon, Sophie Lane, the student who filmed the first video, approached him by the vending machines. "Did you ever want to be a teacher?" she asked. Malcolm paused, the question settling between them like dust. "I wanted to build things," he said quietly. "Teach later, maybe. But life had different ideas." She handed him a fresh mechanical pencil. "Well," she said, "I think you're doing both now." He smiled. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man hiding behind a mop. He felt like someone whose name meant something. Not because it was printed on a degree, but because it was spoken with respect. As word spread, and Pierce sessions became more than just a trend, not everyone was cheering. Some parents had begun calling the school. Most were supportive. A few left voicemails praising Malcolm's impact on their children's confidence and grades. But one anonymous email caught Principal Gaines's attention. Is it appropriate for a janitor to tutor students in a public school setting? Is he certified? Has he been background checked for instruction? The tone wasn't concern. It was resistance. It came not from a place of logic, but discomfort. Malcolm never knew about the email. Gaines handled it swiftly. He's a vetted district employee, he replied to the board. He's done nothing wrong. And if this were about protocol, the concern wouldn't be anonymous. Still, Malcolm could feel something in the air. Not resentment exactly, but a tension. Like some folks didn't know what to make of him now that he no longer blended quietly into the background, he didn't push back. He just kept showing up. Kept teaching. Kept listening. But others noticed the shift too. One afternoon, Mr. Carlson walked into the library while Malcolm was mid-session with a group of students working through a tricky set of integrals. At first, he just stood near the shelves, arms crossed. Then, to everyone's surprise, he stepped forward. "You mind if I sit in?" he asked. Malcolm looked up. His expression didn't change. He gestured to an empty chair. "Long as you don't mind learning something," he said. A few students chuckled, just enough to break the ice. Carlson smirked. For once, it wasn't laced with sarcasm. They sat together that day, spoke little, but the gesture mattered. For Malcolm, it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It wasn't about showing anyone up. It was about showing up. For the students who needed more than what the system expected of them. For the kids who saw something in themselves because someone else finally did. That week, something changed in the way the school breathed. Less guarded, more open. Miss Holloway invited Malcolm to co-host a review session before midterms. Coach Dunlap asked him to speak at the senior banquet, not as a janitor, but as someone who had made an undeniable impact. Even the lunch lady, Ms. Ruth, started putting an extra banana in his bag each Friday. "Brain fuel," she said. "Malcolm didn't ask for these things. He didn't seek the attention, but it found him anyway. Because when you lead with humility, people remember. Not the noise. Not the headlines. But the quiet hands that help them understand something they never thought they could. For all the good it brought, being seen came with its own kind of heaviness. Malcolm wasn't used to it. He'd spent years in the quiet corners of the building cleaning, fixing, disappearing before the last bell rang. The idea that people now looked for him, called his name, waited for him in library corner sit, made his chest tighten in ways he couldn't explain. Some days, it felt like walking in shoes a size too big, like he was borrowing someone else's story. He tried to keep his routine unchanged. Still mopped the cafeteria floors, still replaced light bulbs without anyone asking, still walked the long way around to avoid cutting through crowded hallways. But even routine couldn't shield him from what was shifting, the smiles, the thank yous. The way students leaned in now when he spoke, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And then there were the stories. One student, Eli, stayed behind after a session to say, "I used to think I was stupid. But now I think maybe I just needed the right kind of teacher." Malcolm had nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Another day, Grace handed him a folded note. Inside was a drawing of a bridge. Underneath, she wrote, "Thank you for helping us cross." That night, Malcolm sat at his kitchen table, holding that paper like it was made of glass. He didn't know how to process it. He didn't want to fail them, not after they'd trusted him with their questions, their confusion, their hopes. He wasn't a licensed teacher. He didn't have a classroom of his own, but somehow he'd become a voice they listened to, a presence they looked for. And with that came pressure, the kind that didn't come from expectations, but from meaning. Every time a student said, "I get it now," a piece of him lit up. But every time one struggled, he carried that too. That Friday, Julian caught him near the exit. "Mr. Pierce," he said, "we're thinking of starting a math club. Would you be our advisor?" Malcolm blinked. "I'm not staff." Julian shrugged. "You're something better." Malcolm didn't answer right away. He just nodded, quietly, knowing that in that moment he wasn't carrying the mop. He was carrying something far more fragile, their belief. And that, more than any title, was what made him stay. It was late April when Principal Gaines called Malcolm Pierce into his office again. The morning sun streamed in through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the floor. The desk had its usual clutter coffee mug, half-read memos, and a paperweight shaped like an apple. But today, there was a manila folder laid squarely at the center. "Have a seat, Malcolm," Gaines said, waving him in. Malcolm eased down into the same chair he'd sat in when the tutoring sessions were just a suggestion, not a movement. Gaines tapped the folder. "There's a proposal on the table," he began. "From the district." Malcolm raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "They want to formalize your tutoring into an elective class next semester, not for credity, yet but as an enrichment program. Bridge work, confidence building, math, but also mindset." Malcolm folded his hands slowly. "With me as the instructor," Gaines said. He let the word sit in the air. Malcolm looked down at his hands, calloused from years of wiping down lockers and tightening bolts beneath sinks. "I'm not certified." "No," Gaines said. "But you are qualified." The silence stretched. Malcolm took a slow breath. He thought of the kids, of Julian's quiet leadership, of Grace and her bridge drawing, of Eli reciting quadratic steps like lyrics to a song, of the ones who showed up when no one asked them to. "They come because they want to," Malcolm said, "not because they have to. I don't want to lose that." "And you won't," Gaines replied. "This isn't about making it official for their sake. It's about protecting the space you've already built." He pushed the folder forward. "If you're willing, we'll make it happen. If not, nothing changes." Malcolm didn't open the folder. Not yet. That night, he walked home slower than usual. His neighborhood was quiet, the porch lights blinking on like fireflies. He passed the corner bodega, nodded to Mrs. Tran, who always stocked his favorite tea, and climbed the 3 flights to his apartment. The cardboard box was still under the bed. He didn't pull it out this time. Instead, he sat on the floor beside it, leaning his back against the frame. There was something about the idea of a classroom that scared him more than any unsolved equation. It wasn't fear of failure. It was fear of becoming something he didn't recognize. He didn't want the kids to think he had changed, to see him standing in front with a title and a desk, instead of beside them on the floor with a pencil and a question. But deep down, he knew what this really was. It wasn't about a title. It was about permanence. A chance to stop holding the door for others and finally step through it himself. The next day, he spoke to Ms. Holloway in the hallway between classes. "You think I can do this?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, really looked. I think you already are. By Friday, Malcolm had made his decision. He met with Gaines after school. I'll do it, he said, but I want to write my own curriculum. I want to call it Foundations, and I want to start every class with a question, not an answer. Gaines smiled. Whatever you need. And just like that, a room was reserved. A whiteboard was installed. A small sign was posted. Foundations, Mr. Pierce. Malcolm asked the custodian team if he could keep a copy of his shift. He still wanted to clean the library in the early mornings. It grounded him. By Monday, news had already spread. More students than expected signed up, some out of curiosity, others because they remembered how it felt to understand something for the first time in a long while. And when Malcolm walked into that room for the first time, not as the janitor, not even as the tutor, but as the teacher, the students were already waiting. No one clapped. No one needed to. He picked up the marker, turned to the board, and wrote the first question of the semester. What pattern did you overlook today? Then he turned around, smiled softly, and said, Let's talk about it. By the second week of Foundations, something had changed. Not just the class roster, which had quietly doubled, or the fact that students now showed up early just to claim a seat. No, what changed was the feeling in the room, the quiet belief that this space belonged to them. The desks were mismatched. The whiteboard was slightly crooked, the chairs squeaked, but it didn't matter. It felt like theirs. Malcolm never used a textbook. Instead, he brought in problems from old engineering notebooks, ideas from library PDFs, and even brain teasers he remembered from his mother's bedtime riddles. And every day, he began class the same way, with a question. What did you misunderstand yesterday? What rule have you been told but never challenged? What makes you feel stuck? He didn't expect answers right away. He just let the silence fill the room until someone was brave enough to speak. And when they did, others followed. It wasn't math the way they knew it. It was conversation, inquiry, permission to be curious. Coach Dunlap stopped by once, just to see what it looked like. He stayed the full hour, arms folded, smiling softly. It's like they're building a house, he told Principal Gaines afterward. And he's just handing them the blueprints. More teachers began visiting, not to supervise, but to sit in the back and listen. Even Mr. Carlson made an appearance. He didn't speak. He didn't even make eye contact, but he stayed. Malcolm noticed, at the end of class, Carlson paused by the door. You explained implicit differentiation without calling it that, he said. Malcolm nodded. They don't need the word, they need the why. Carlson gave the smallest of nods. Fair point. And walked out. That Friday, Sophie Lane left a folder on Malcolm's desk. Inside were handwritten letters from students, some simple, some long, all genuine. Before this, math made me feel dumb. I stopped raising my hand last year. I raise it now. My mom cried when I told her I liked school again. Malcolm read each one slowly, carefully. He didn't cry, but when he got home, he placed them in the box under his bed, right next to the Purdue sweatshirt. That same week, a local reporter showed up. Her name was Nina Alvarez. She'd heard about the janitor-turned-educator and wanted to write a feature. I'm not interested in going viral, Malcolm said. I know, she replied. I'm not here for clicks. I'm here for the truth. He agreed, reluctantly. The article ran 3 days later in the Sunday edition. More than a mop, how one man rebuilt a classroom from the ground up. It wasn't flashy. No dramatic headlines, just stories, student voices, teacher quotes, and one black and white photo of Malcolm at the whiteboard, marker in hand, his sleeves still rolled up. The story traveled. Emails started trickling in from other districts, principals, teachers, parents. How did he do it? Could we try something like this? Is Mr. Pierce available for a phone call? Malcolm didn't answer most of them. He wasn't looking to franchise anything. He had enough right here, one day at a time. One student at a time. Because for him, the goal was never to change the world. Just to show someone it was okay to ask questions again. That spring, during Eisenberg High's annual student showcase night, the library corner was transformed. The walls were lined with math journals, student reflections, and colorful posters that read things like, "It finally made sense." He listens first. "I didn't quit this time." In one corner, a sign read, "Welcome to Mr. Pierce's room." Malcolm stood quietly off to the side, dressed in his uniform, a clean towel folded in his back pocket, and a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand. He wasn't the main act, but somehow everyone kept finding their way to him. The school year drew to a close with the kind of momentum nobody had planned for. Foundations had gone from a side room with 3 kids to something woven into the very fabric of Eisenberg High. Students who used to fail math were now leading group discussions. Notes were passed, not to cheat, but to share strategies. For the first time in years, students wanted to learn. Malcolm Pierce kept everything the same. Same uniform. Same quiet tone. Same thermos of tea every morning. But the way people looked at him, that had changed forever. By May, the school board had approved a summer pilot program. Malcolm was asked to help design the structure, but he refused to be the face of it. "I'll build it," he said, "but let the students run it." He trained a handful of them, Julian, Grace, Eli, and 3 other sons, how to lead peer sessions. How to guide without giving answers. How to listen before responding. How to believe in someone until they believed in themselves. On the last day of school, Malcolm didn't make a speech, but his students did. At the final assembly, Sophie Lane walked to the podium with a folded paper in her hand and a group of students behind her. "We were going to call this a thank you," she began, voice steady, "but it's more than that." She paused, then opened the paper. "It's a recommendation, not for college, not for a job, but for a man who never asked for recognition, never wore a tie, and never once called himself a teacher, but taught us more than anyone ever has." The crowd was silent, until someone started clapping. Then the gym shook with it. Malcolm, standing in the back near the fire exit, didn't move. He just watched, eyes a little wet, hands folded. After the ceremony, Principal Gaines found him. "There's a new position opening up next year," he said. "It's not traditional. Part mentor, part instructor, part coordinator. No precedent, no strict description. But it's yours if you want it." Malcolm looked at the hallway just outside. A girl was trying to explain a math problem to her friend using one of his diagrams. He smiled. "Let's just keep calling it foundations." Gaines nodded. "You got it." That summer, Malcolm finally cleaned out the box under his bed. He didn't throw anything away, but he didn't keep it in hiding either. He moved it to a shelf, eye level. Next to it, he added a new folderone filled with handwritten notes, thank you cards, and doodles from students who once thought math was impossible. He still woke up early, still swept the gym floor when it needed it, still fixed the leaky faucet in the boys' locker room when no one else wanted to deal with it. But every Tuesday and Thursday, he wore a badge that read, Instructor, Foundations Program. He never asked for it, but someone made it anyway. And over time, students stopped whispering, "That's the janitor who teaches math." They started saying, "That's Mr. Pierce." Just like that. Not because of a degree, not because of a job title, but because he showed up, listened, believed, and gave them a reason to believe in themselves. That was the real legacy. Not a name on a plaque, but confidence passed from one hand to the next, one lesson at a time. And for Malcolm Pierce, that was more than enough. Sometimes, the people who leave the biggest impact never ask to be noticed. They don't carry titles. They don't lead from a podium. They simply show up quietly, consistently, with a heart full of purpose. Malcolm Pierce was a janitor. He swept the floors, changed the light bulbs, fixed the leaky faucets, and for years, no one really saw him, not for who he truly was. But when given the smallest moment, a chance to solve a math problem on a whiteboard, the world around him began to shift. And more importantly, so did the students who watched him. What began as curiosity turned into trust. What started with a chalkboard became a classroom of hope. And slowly, without fanfare or formalities, Mr. Pierce became what every great teacher is, a guide. Someone who doesn't just deliver answers, but helps you believe you can find them yourself. The deeper message of this story isn't just about education, it's about dignity, about purpose. About rediscovering worth in the quietest corners of a life that may have been overlooked by others or even by yourself. For older viewers, many of whom have lived long enough to know how easily a dream can be delayed or buried, Malcolm's story is a reminder. Our contributions don't expire with age. Our wisdom doesn't diminish because we took a different road. And our legacy isn't measured by accolades, but by how many lives we quietly influence. Whether you're a retired veteran, a former teacher, a grandparent, or someone who once left behind a passion to care for others, this story might feel familiar. And maybe it's the nudge you needed to know. It's not too late to make an impact. It's never too late to show up. You may not wear a name badge that says instructor, but if someone listens when you speak, if someone grows because of your presence, then you're already leading. Legacy doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it walks into a room with a mop in hand and leaves it carrying the belief of a generation.